Means there is a distinct psychological origin behind men who instinctively prioritize the needs of women in their relationships, often without realizing where it began. Tendency rarely emerges in adulthood without foundation. It is usually the echo of childhood patterns deeply wired into their nervous system. Many cases, men grew up in homes where their emotional safety was dependent on the emotional state of the women around them. May have been a mother who struggled with anxiety, depression, or emotional volatility. Or perhaps a single mother who leaned heavily on her son for emotional support, subtly casting him into a role far beyond his years. In these environments, the boy becomes highly sensitive to the moods, tone, and body language of the woman closest to him. His own needs may have been deprioritized, or worse, punished. So he learns early on, if I can soothe her, if I can keep her calm, if I can avoid setting her off, then I will be okay. Adaptation is not consciously chosen. It is an act of survival. The child doesn't say, I will become a people pleaser. Instead, the child's nervous system encodes a rule. My emotional safety depends on the emotional regulation of the woman in front of me. This encoding grows quietly over time. The boy becomes the peacemaker, the good son, the emotionally intelligent one. May be praised for how thoughtful or mature he is, but this maturity is often just masked hyper-vigilance. Not merely kind, he is managing. As this child becomes a man, he carries these strategies into adult relationships. Often dates women whom he wants to impress not through dominance or charisma, but through caretaking and emotional attentiveness. He listens deeply. He remembers what she likes, anticipates what might upset her, and adjusts before she has to ask. He becomes fluent in the language of empathy and support. But beneath this noble effort lies an unconscious belief. I am valuable because I am useful. I am loved because I am safe. I belong because I adapt. Dynamic is not necessarily dysfunctional, but it can become imbalanced, especially when the man has never examined the origins of his pleasing behavior. If love is always something he must earn, then relationships become performances. And when the applause stops, when he is not appreciated, or when his efforts are not reciprocated, he feels not just rejected, but erased. What was once survival becomes a cage. He may begin to wonder why he feels so disconnected from his own wants, why he feels unchosen despite all his efforts to be everything for someone else. And often, he doesn't know how to stop, because stopping feels like failing the very role that once protected him. When a man consistently puts the needs of others, especially women, before his own, he often loses touch with what he truly wants. His internal compass becomes skewed, pointing not toward personal desire, but toward what will please, appease, or earn him approval. In relationships, this translates into a man who is attentive, considerate, and often very giving, but also someone who struggles to name his own needs or express dissatisfaction. Over time, this imbalance creates a disconnect between how he appears and what he feels. He may appear generous, present, even romantic, but inside he may feel hollow, frustrated, or unseen. His identity becomes built around serving others. In that process, his own sense of self can erode. Desire is rooted in a clear connection to the self. Knowing what excites you, what fuels you, what boundaries you need to maintain your sense of autonomy. For men who grow up pleasing, act of desiring something for themselves can feel foreign or even selfish. They may have been raised in environments where their own wishes were secondary to others' needs, especially those of their caregivers. So in adult relationships, asserting what they want can trigger guilt, fear of rejection, or a deep discomfort with taking up space. As a result, their romantic and erotic selves often remain underdeveloped. They are good at creating emotional safety, but struggle with sustaining erotic charge requires a sense of self that is distinct, separate, and unapologetically alive. The tension builds quietly. Men may not even realize how much they've silenced their own voices. They become experts at reading their partner's emotions, but novices at expressing their own. They know how to avoid conflict, but not how to stand in it. Over time, leads to a disconnection, not only from their partners, but from themselves. They may begin to feel a quiet resentment, a sense of depletion, or a longing they can't quite articulate. Some will internalize this as personal failure, believing they are simply not enough, rather than recognizing the imbalance they've been carrying for years. Ironically, very trait that once made them so desirable, their deep capacity to care, can also become the reason their relationships begin to feel stagnant or unfulfilling. Partners might begin to ask, "What do you want?" and receive a vague or uncertain answer. This isn't because the man has no desire, because he has spent so long suppressing it that he no longer knows how to access it. Desire cannot thrive in an environment of self-erasure. It requires risk, individuality, and a willingness to be seen, not just as someone who serves, but as someone who wants. Reclaiming this connection to personal desire is not a betrayal of their caring nature, it is the integration of it. Only when they begin to recognize their own longings can they fully show up in a relationship, not just as a giver, as a whole desiring being. The label of nice guy is often used to describe men who go out of their way to be helpful, agreeable, emotionally supportive, particularly in romantic relationships. These men are praised for their kindness, their sensitivity, and their ability to listen and respond to a partner's needs. On the surface, seems like a perfect formula for a successful relationship. But beneath that surface, something more complex often exists. The niceness that is so admired may not always come from a place of genuine self-expression. It can be a strategy for maintaining emotional safety, avoiding conflict, and securing approval. And over time, that strategy carries a cost. When a man consistently performs niceness in a way that suppresses his authentic feelings or needs, he slowly begins to disconnect from himself. He learns to anticipate rather than express, to accommodate rather than assert. Role in the relationship becomes centered on keeping the peace and ensuring that his partner is comfortable, often at the expense of his own emotional truth. This self-sacrifice, while often unconscious, creates a quiet tension. He may begin to feel invisible, not because his partner is ignoring him, because he has systematically silenced his own voice. The cultural narrative reinforces this pattern. From a young age, many boys are taught that masculinity is dangerous unless softened by restraint. Emotions are often either shamed or instrumentalized. Anger is threatening, sadness is weak, desire is suspicious unless filtered through politeness. So the nice guy becomes the man who avoids all of these risky expressions in order to remain likable, acceptable, safe. But what gets lost in the process is the complexity of his emotional world. He becomes palatable, but not fully present. In relationships, dynamic can become problematic When the woman begins to feel like she is partnered with someone who is always agreeable, but not fully available, she may say, "You're so nice, but I don't feel like I really know you." Or, "You never disagree with me, but I don't know what you stand for." She wants depth, not just compliance. She wants to feel the edges of her partner, not just the smooth surface. Over time, the absence of conflict or tension doesn't feel peaceful. It feels empty. For the man, this can be confusing and painful. He has done everything right, and yet the relationship doesn't feel alive. May feel unappreciated or even betrayed when his constant efforts to please are met with distance or dissatisfaction. Doesn't realize that in trying to be everything for his partner, he has slowly disappeared. The cost of niceness is not that it is wrong, it's that it is incomplete. True connection requires more than good behavior, requires vulnerability, truth-telling, and a willingness to reveal not only what is pleasing, but also what is difficult, messy, or inconvenient. Without that, niceness becomes a mask. And over time, even the most well-intentioned mask begins to suffocate the person behind it. Men who are conditioned to please often carry an underlying fear of being a disappointment. Fear doesn't present itself loudly, it shows up quietly in the way they hesitate before expressing disagreement, in their tendency to say yes, even when they mean no, in their ongoing efforts to make sure everyone around them is comfortable. The psychological root of this fear usually goes back to early relational experiences, moments where expressing their needs led to emotional withdrawal, criticism, or disconnection from the people they depended on for love. Over time, they internalized a belief to be loved. I must be agreeable, to be accepted. I must never upset or let anyone down. As adults, belief becomes the foundation for their relationships. They shape, shift, adapt, perform emotional labor in ways that appear thoughtful and caring, but are often driven by anxiety. Conflict becomes terrifying not because of the argument itself, because of what it represents. The potential rupture of love, the possibility of rejection, or the shame of failing to be good enough. These men don't argue their point, not because they don't have one, but because they fear that speaking their truth might cost them connection. Their self-worth is often tethered to how well they can manage other people's reactions. When this dynamic is in play, relationships can become emotionally asymmetrical. The man gives and accommodates while quietly suppressing his own discomfort. He learns to read the room with precision, to anticipate needs before they're expressed, and to fill in emotional gaps. On the surface, this can look like emotional intelligence, but underneath it is often a deep fear of rejection disguised as kindness. The woman in his life may initially feel seen and cared for, but over time, she may sense that she is alone in carrying the emotional risk of the relationship. She may begin to crave a partner who can hold his own center, who can disagree with respect, who can show up with clarity rather than compliance. For the man, the idea of disappointing someone feels catastrophic. May believe that love is conditional, that one wrong move will result in abandonment or emotional punishment. Belief makes authenticity feel dangerous. So he stays in the safe zone of being agreeable, helpful, and undemanding. But ironically, the more he tries not to disappoint, the more disconnected the relationship becomes. Partner may begin to feel like she's in a relationship with a mirror, someone who reflects her doesn't reveal himself. The work for these men is not to stop caring or to become combative, to recognize that disappointment is a part of every real relationship. It's through moments of conflict, truth, boundary setting that intimacy deepens. When a man learns that he can be both loving and disappointing and still be loved, he steps into a fuller version of himself. In doing so, he invites a deeper, more authentic connection with the person he loves. Desire thrives in contrast, not in sameness. It lives in the electric space between two distinct people, each with their own voice, autonomy, inner world. For men who have been conditioned to constantly please, especially in relationships with women, necessary contrast often disappears. They become so focused on merging, on aligning, on adjusting themselves to fit their partner's wants and needs that they unintentionally dissolve the polarity that keeps desire alive. What remains is harmony, yes, but not heat. Safety, but not spark. In the early stages of a relationship, this can feel ideal. The man is attuned, responsive, eager to meet every emotional and physical need. He listens, supports, and avoids conflict. But over time, the partner may begin to feel a subtle void, like something essential is missing. It isn't care or kindness, presence. It's the bold, self-defined energy that comes from someone who knows who they are and isn't afraid to show up in full. Absence doesn't come from a lack of love, but from the over-functioning of self-erasure in the name of harmony. Men who fall into this pattern are not emotionally absent. They are emotionally accommodating. And accommodation, while useful in some situations, becomes a problem when it overrides authenticity. When a man constantly prioritizes his partner's needs while minimizing or ignoring his own, the relationship becomes unbalanced. He becomes the emotional caretaker, the quiet fixer, the one who smooths every wrinkle before it has a chance to breathe. But in doing so, he also flattens himself. And flatness, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually becomes dull. Erotic desire requires difference. It's born from friction, from mystery, from the dance between closeness and space. When a man disappears into the role of pleaser, he may believe he is being the ideal partner, but he's often suppressing his own erotic identity. Passion becomes performance. His intimacy becomes management. His presence becomes conditional, available only when it guarantees safety and approval. Compromises not only the sexual connection, but the emotional vitality of the relationship. The woman in the relationship may begin to feel like she is engaging with someone who is agreeable but not alive. She may ask questions like, "What do you want?" Or, "What are you really feeling?" Not because she doesn't value his kindness, because she longs to encounter the full complexity of who he is.